With Ralph Michaels, Rob Veno, I am Drew Martin. We are talking about the ACC Atlantic Division. Ralph, welcome in, buddy. How you feeling, bud?
Doing great, guys. Holiday passed us. It's, the more and more we hear about sports, the more and more exciting it is. So, hey, let's finally get some of these sports started.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And we're getting some good news, at least positive news. So hopefully that shines a good light here on the ACC and college football overall. And Robbie Veno from a dark basement somewhere in the Northeast, I'm guessing. Welcome in, man. How you feeling?
Yeah, I don't know what it is with the lights here, Drew. They're all on, but for some reason I look like I'm, crawling my way out of a tunnel here. But I'm actually not. I'm in the office set up here, ready to roll with ACC Atlantic Division. And like you guys said, hey, listen, when Ohio State says they're going to put 20,000 people in the seats, when UCF says they're ready to put fans in the seats, all those that trickling type of news leads us to more and more positive, a more positive outlook that we're going to get college football here. So I'm pretty happy about that. I know you guys are too.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. And like Ralph said before, I mean, the guys, sorry about the lighting and the picture issues, but we don't think many people are watching to see our faces, more for the information betting-wise coming up to college football this year. Ralph, well said there. We got the ACC Atlantic Division, Clemson, then Louisville, Wake Forest, FSU, Boston College, Syracuse, and NC State are the teams we are breaking down on today's show, guys. We will do the Coastal Division next week, and then hopefully hit each and every conference in college football before we kick off. But starting off at the top, last year's kind of division standings down. Clemson, the Clemson Tigers, 14-1, 11-4 against the number, guys. A good ATS spread last year, and of course their season ending in the loss to LSU in the national championship game. A couple things I took away just from kind of recapping their season from last year. They only played in 2 games all year long within 2 touchdowns, that being the semifinal game against Ohio State and 1 game in the regular season against UNC. All the other games, they just smashed their opponents or lost LSU by more than 2 touchdowns. Of course, Dabo Swinney has put together a monster in Clemson, South Carolina, Ralph. We know they're going to be favored in a lot of games. From a betting perspective, do you think there's value one way, maybe with them kind of getting even more building on last year in terms of their 11-4 ATS record, maybe some betting value on Clemson? Or are you going to look to kind of turn that and think that the market's going to overvalue the Clemson Tigers this year, Ralph? Well,
much like Alabama was on a run a couple years ago, Drew, where we talked about Alabama always covering first half spreads. This downtime has allowed me, I'm doing a first quarter, first half newsletter which will be available at WagerTalk and Sports Memo. And I go through and I look at Clemson last year. Clemson as a home favorite was 8-0 in the first half. They were 5-1-1 first quarter lines, but 8-0 in the first half. And that's exactly what you expect. Expect Clemson to get out to the big leads. Expect them in the second half to not worry about running up the score, letting some young kids play, letting some young kids get experience. And last year, they only had 10 returning starters back. So this year, they're returning 11, again, with one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the league. I think 3 of their players are projected to be first 15-round draft picks next year. So it's the same. I mean, in my power ratings, in the Atlantic, I have Clemson number 1 in the country at 97.8. The number 2 team in the conference for me, I have Florida State, and I have a 19-point difference from the number 1 team to the number 2 team in the Atlantic. So really, I mean, how much needs to be said about Clemson when you throw out those kind of numbers?
Yeah, I mean, that is a heck of a drop-off. And I'm guessing, Ralph, and if you don't know this is okay, is that the biggest drop-off from top to bottom out of any conference in college football?
Oh, not even a question. Second? I mean, it's I have North Carolina, the number 2 team. So it's not quite that big of a drop-off from the first to second team, but it's close to that. So, much like why the New England Patriots had so much success for all those years, you're playing in a weak division. Clemson's benefiting from playing in a very weak ACC.
Yeah, absolutely, Ralph. And Robbie, what are you thinking here with the Clemson Tigers? Just one game away from a national championship last year, but do you think they'll be overvalued this upcoming year, or continue with that 11-4 ATS run they finished with last year?
Yeah, it's hard to think that they would be overvalued, Drew, when you just look at the prices that they laid last year and covered. How many more points can you give than what Clemson has been giving and, covering the number in pretty substantial style. So you would really have to bump those lines up quite a bit. Now, much like Ralph just said, he makes the gap between 1 and 2, 19 in his power ratings. I make the gap 23 between 1 and 2. So even a little further apart, I have Clemson separated from the rest. We'll see. A team like Florida State inside their own division, which we'll talk about, may be able to make some strides. North Carolina obviously has hit the recruiting trail and done well. But for Clemson, they don't draw much from the other side of the league, right? They draw, I think, Virginia and Wake Forest. Wake Forest, the tougher of the two, I would think. But Wake Forest doesn't have a lot of returning experience. Sam Hartman will step in and play quarterback now that Jamie Newman's gone. Sam Hartman's had that job before, so not really a problem. But the point being, from the other side, in your two non-divisional games, the crossover games, there's really not much to stand in Clemson's way. They get a bye week before they play Notre Dame, which is probably the toughest game on their schedule. It's tough to see. I know that they're returning experience. And Ralph, you put out the chart for everybody to see. The returning experience ranks 96th in the nation, but it doesn't mean too much with Clemson, guys, because the next wave comes in and takes over. So as long as they have Trevor Lawrence, Justin Ross, and the running game that they have, they're going to be in good shape. I can't see any reason why they would drop off severely point spread wise.
Drew, one more point about Clemson and their dominance from number 1 to number 2. Teams like Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson often return fewer starters because so many people leave early to go to the NFL. When you look at the recruiting ranks, and I think 247 Sports does the best job, so I just use their numbers straight from their site. Clemson is number 3 in the country for their 220 class. Florida State is number 22. NC State is number 41. So you have number 3, number 2, and number 41 in your division with recruiting. And again, despite only having 11 starters back, that's why you're still a 500-1 favorite just to win the Atlantic.
Oh, yeah. And Robbie, one question to you, with Clemson being a 20-point favorite, I guess, according to your power ratings over almost any ACC team, a lot of that, when that comes into actually handicapping it game by game, I bring into head coach's mentality, the head coach, the offensive coordinator. Are they looking to kind of step on the gas pedal and really kind of take it to their opponents, or kind of loosen up? Like we've seen, Nick Saban doesn't always have the greatest ATS numbers, even though the talent he has there at Alabama. How would you kind of rank Dabo Swinney, taking that factor into account?
Well, he's a master motivator, right? He's probably even more motivational than any head coach. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I mean, obviously, Herm Edwards is a great motivator as well, but Dabo is proven to be able to motivate his kids. One negative here, guys, now that I think about it, that we should have brought out right off the top is, the tradition at Clemson with the players running down and touching Howard's Rock and the people camping out on Thursday night for a Saturday ball game. If in fact they start the season without people in the seats, if you're a visitor at Clemson and you can get off to a good start and there's no home crowd to help the home team back, you won't get straight up wins, I don't think, but perhaps you could get point spread covers that way. We'll have to see how Clemson treats the attendance. I think every team is going to be a little bit different here. I'm sure they'll try to get people in the seats, but the crowd thing might come into play where point spread is concerned, because that is a motivational aspect. If Clemson were to get themselves into trouble, crowd can bring them out of it. Without much of a crowd, we'll see.
Ralph, we get a question in the chat box from David. Thanks for the question, David. And guys, any questions out there, feel free to throw them out in the chat box on YouTube, and we'll get them out here to Ralph, Rob, and myself. If this team plays at the same spreads as last year, do they cover like they did last year, Ralph. So if you were pricing them the same against their opponents as last year, how do you think they'll do ATS this upcoming year?
Well, I think the comparison is, and again, I'm going to go back to the guide that's free at WagerTalk, because you have to know what happened last year. Well, last year, Clemson had 9.7 starters, Louisville at 15.3, Wake had 10.4, Boston College 9, Florida State 12.7, Syracuse 12, NC State 11. So last year, they were the second lowest in their division. What did they do? They go 9-0 straight up, 14-1, and again, lose to LSU in the championship. This year, they're actually in much better shape. So, they may be number 96 in experience, but the 11 returning starters, they're better off than Wake, who doesn't have the quarterback back. They're the same as Syracuse. They're behind Florida State, who has 17, and Louisville has 16, but they're actually closer to the middle than they were last year. So, I see Clemson dominating first halves again, with or without fans. Yeah, people ask me what my favorite stat is. How do you look at a team, and how do you look at how good they were? Is it yards per game diff? Is it points per game diff? I'll tell you what, my number one favorite stat to use, and I'm going to give a plug to my old boss at philsteele.com. On his pages, we worked out a formula that we look at how you did against what that team did as an average for the season. So Clemson against Georgia Tech last year at 632 yards. That 632 yards was 228 yards above the average of what Georgia Tech normally gains. So when you add up those averages, those plus or minuses for the whole season, Clemson was number one in defense. They held their opponents by 136 yards below their average. They were number 3 in offense on the year. They gained 124 yards more than that opponent allowed on the season on average. So when you look at a team as a whole and you take what those teams did on average and how well you did against that average, I think that's the truest testament of how a team does. And again, Clemson's numbers number 3 on offense for the year and number 1 on defense for the year. So it just shows you, again, this 4-year stretch is one of the greatest 4-year stretches in college football. 14-1, 14-1, 12-2, 15-0, add 14-1 in there, 4 national championship appearances, 2 national championship titles, the elite team of the decade, no question.
Hey guys, the chat box is going off right now. Serial Dog, welcome in from Wichita. We also got another question here. Beat the House, welcome in. Thanks for smashing that like button. Chris, as always, welcome in, buddy. Andy Workman with the question, real quick, guys, because we got to hit the rest of the teams in the Atlantic. But Robbie, would you take Clemson over Ohio State for the national champion?
I'm not sure that I would, Drew. I mean, we saw the game played last year. Some will claim that there's a play in there that changed the entire game in the third quarter and took it away from Ohio State and gave it to Clemson. So it was that close, no matter which way you look at it. Ohio State has proven to be a team that reloads. They probably, guys, in the last 5 years, there's been a couple of years where they have been depleted to the NFL, and it hasn't mattered. They've just come right back with just as good of a defense, just as good of an offense. So with Justin Fields still there, perhaps Ohio State would have a revenge motive in that game. I think it's hard to project that far down the line when they might meet. But I think in my case, I might look at Ohio State just purely from a revenge angle against Clemson, assuming that the talent levels, like I do, are pretty much equal.
And Ralph, anything real quick there, Clemson or Ohio State?
Oh, I have Clemson a point better than Ohio State, and that's it. So, it just depends on current form when you get there. So I have Clemson 1, Ohio State 2, Bama 3, as my top 3 teams.
Okay, good stuff, guys. And we got Tommy Lynch saying Clemson first half could become the play with no crowd noise, may lose interest in the second half. That's a good point there, Tommy. Something to kind of circle for our notes going into the regular season. We got Louisville up next. Ryan with a comment on Louisville in the chat box. Louisville beat Mississippi State in their bowl game last year. This is 8-5 Louisville, straight up and ATS by my numbers last year. Bobby Petrino 2018 to Scott Scatterfield in 2019, the biggest turnaround, in my opinion, in college football. And Ralph, I'll tell you, this is one of the biggest turnarounds in college football from 2 years ago to last year that I can remember in quite some time, Ralph. Louisville was a heck of a team last year. Scott Satterfield did a great job. Do you think they continue that into 2020?
I agree that he was my coach of the year. But, let's also look that Louisville the year before that was the team with Lamar Jackson. So it's not always fair. I need to look at a 3 or a 4 year swing of the program to know how epic of a turnaround was. If a 1-win team, and you get to 7 wins, that's an epic turnaround. But this team had Lamar Jackson 3 years ago. Last year, everything just fell apart and again went to shits, which we see happen in college football, on occasion. So the turnaround was there, but they still had talent. But again, still deserved my coach of the year. I look at Louisville now, and they were second or third for me in this division. I actually ended up moving Florida State a little bit ahead of them. Their offense went from 353 yards to 447. That's because of Scott Satterfield. They have 6 players in the transfer portal. I'm doing a transfer thing. I'm doing a transfer report, which will be available. Clemson had 4 players in the portal, just FYI. Louisville has 6 players. One of those is a starter. But when you have your starting quarterback, your starting running back, your top wide receiver coming back, you are on a team that had 1 net close win. Your turnovers were even. Your offense, as I said, I like the averages when you compare a team against the averages. They were number 19 in offense, only number 100 in defense. So clearly the defense is where they're going to have to pull up. Last year, Louisville had 15 starters, but again, a lot of injuries ended up happening throughout the season. This year, Louisville has 16 returning starters, 8 on offense, 8 on defense. The 42 recruiting was a little bit low for me. I was surprised it was that low, but they're the number 13 most experienced team coming back. So, if the defense can turn around with 8 starters, Louisville's going to challenge Florida State for number 2 in the division.
Good stuff, Ralph. And we got Ryan saying Louisville defense, any upside this year? ? He likes the Satterfield QB combo there for Louisville. Robbie, what are you thinking for the Louisville Cardinals this upcoming year, man?
Yeah, it's interesting, Drew, because if you just look at the last 5 games that they played last season, and we would think that the last 5, because I think we started this off maybe in the chat room or with yourself, Drew, by saying that they beat Mississippi State in their bowl game. So you think that team was coming on at the end of their year. But their last 5 games are really sporadic, right? I mean, if you go to after the bye week when they hit November, they give up 52 points to Miami of Florida, a team that – some days scored, some days didn't, but 52 is a huge amount of points. They beat NC State with a very green quarterback in Devin Leary. They beat Syracuse, but they give up 500 yards. Kentucky has nothing but an option quarterback. They run the ball 90% of the time last year, right? And they waxed Louisville in a game that Scott Satterfield should have had his team up for. It's the in-state rivalry that you coach at Louisville for. They get waxed, and then they beat Mississippi State. Of course, Mississippi State has their quarterback get punched in the jaw by a teammate before the bowl and can't play the game. So, things were crumbling at MSU to start with. So, I don't know how better they got. The other side of that coin is there were complete schematic changes on both sides of the football last year. A learning experience is to be expected. And Scott Satterfield's now in year 2 of his regime, and the players should get it. Ralph mentioned the quarterback comes back. Cunningham played very well when not injured. They've got a lot of, skill talent. They can be very, very explosive. I think everybody here has hit it on the head when we say that the defense is going to be the ultimate deciding factor for this team and their schedule, guys. And when you come right out of the box and have to play 2 divisional foes right away, they'll play NC State and Clemson in their first 2 games, and 5 of their first 7 will be against Atlantic Division teams. So they're inside the division 5 times in their first 7 games. In essence, their season might be decided after, at least as far as going to the ACC championship game, it's decided after week 2, and maybe we could say that's a foregone conclusion anyway, because Clemson will represent that division. But the point being, it's a difficult schedule There's one bye before Florida State. To have to play 4 of your first 6 without a bye against divisional foes, that could be tough for Louisville. I'm kind of in the wait and see area with them. But I think offensively they'll be great, and I think second year of Satterfield will be better as well.
Robbie, I'm going to, I don't disagree with you often, but one point I want to make, you talked about allowing 52 points to Miami and losing 52-27. They actually had a 496 to 449 yardage edge. They were -3 turnovers. They turned the ball over like 5 times, gave Miami just multiple easy scores. So to me, that's one of those toss-out games that, yes, they played poorly, but there's a reason why. And then when I look at Louisville's schedule, Louisville is only going to be a dog in 2 games this year. They're going to be a 28-point dog in my power ratings to Clemson, and they're going to be a 17-point dog at Notre Dame. The first 6 games, 10-point favorite to NC State, 45-point favorite to Murray State, 11.8 favorite to Western Kentucky, 6-point favorite at Syracuse, 6-point favorite at Boston College. You can easily be 5-1 with your only loss. And then what happens? You get a bye, which is perfect. And then 4 of your last 6 games are toss-up games. I have them even at Florida State, a 1-point dog to Virginia, a 2.3 dog to Virginia Tech, and a 1.3 favorite against Kentucky. So to me, it's perfect. You throw out the loss to Clemson, no problem. You're favored in 5 of your 6 games by 6 points or more. You get the bye. You have your team ready to play, more experienced, and then you play all your tough games after that October 17th off week.
Yeah, it's a great point, Ralph. And I think that in the case of the 5 of the first 7 being against ACC Atlantic, maybe to your point, 4 of those are going to be going through scheme changes on some side of the football. The only one that won't is Clemson. The other 4 all have offensive or defensive, or in some cases both, being changed. So you catch them early when they're not quite familiar with their system, and that's a bonus for Louisville. The other side to that is it's a team that was only favored 5 times last year. Now, going through your numbers, they're going to be asked to lay significant prices. Those numbers that you rattled off, Ralph, are far different than the point spreads that they were working with last year. So we'll see how much of an improvement they do have. Winning games. And again, Drew, when we talk to the listeners here, remember that over-under wins for the season can be an entirely different bet. Is an entirely different bet than betting week to week against the spread here. So, we're probably giving you advice from all sides here. I think Louisville may be a good team if you're going game by game also to look at as an over team, considering I don't think that the defense will step up that much and the offense should be really good.
Guys, great breakdown so far of the top 2 teams from last year's standings in the ACC Atlantic Division. We got Wake Forest up next. Tommy talking about Mike Norvell coming to FSU. They will be the next team after Wake Forest. But the Demon Deacons up right now, 8-5 last year. Robbie, coming back at you, they were just 5-8 against the spread. We just talked about their quarterback situation with Hartman. Newman, I believe he's gone to the University of Georgia. Dave Clawson, he's had a good thing going here with the Demon Deacons. But what do you think for Wake coming up this year, 2020?
5 spring practices in, a team that had no coaching changes. So everything stays the same. What doesn't stay the same for Wake Forest is the fact that the returning experience chart shows that they lost quite a bit. I want to read you some things from Dave Clawson, the head coach, during the spring, pointing out he was disappointed in last year's season because he legitimately felt like Wake Forest should have won 10 games, and they didn't. They've gone to 4 straight bowl games, which obviously the alumni at Wake Forest is thrilled with, but the head coach isn't as thrilled. He thinks they can be better. A couple of things he wants to look at this year, or wants to work on, because he was asked where the weak spots of this team are: offensive line and cornerback. Probably 2 spots you don't want to be extremely weak at. But from Dave Clawson, he said the last 2 years we've graduated 6 really good football players on our offensive line. They're not just 6 average offensive linemen. They were really good ones. They're hoping that they can get guys to step in and protect Sam Hartman. I don't think the quarterback's the issue here, guys. Jamie Newman is probably a notch above Sam Hartman. But remember, Sam Hartman had this job, and Sam Hartman produced in this job as a true freshman. So I don't think quarterback would be the issue. The issue is going to be whether or not this offensive line protects him. Wake Forest has been a team that's gone through substantial injuries the last couple of years. I think 2 years ago, they were down to maybe one linebacker and some fourth and fifth teamers. What it did was it caused Wake Forest last year to make some personnel changes to go to only two linebackers. Dave Clawson's main concern outside of the positional spots, corner and offensive line, is creating depth. And they went so far as to have a coaches meeting during the spring where they sat down and they actually listed numbers, depth that they wanted at every single position, where if they get hurt, which they have the last 2 years, the next guy is coached well enough to be able to come in and not have any drop off. And he set numbers at quarterback, at running back, at offensive line, at wide receiver, at every position. And each positional coach is now assigned that duty to make sure, if you're the linebackers coach, you got to have 7 linebackers. Make sure that when I get to number 7, if I do, and I have to put him in the game, that guy can play and there's no drop off. So this coach, I think that's a long way of saying that this coach is looking to make that next step inside this division. And with what he's done so far, I don't know that I want to bet against him, guys. I think Wake Forest is the team on that ascent. We'll see where they're lined this season. Again, Jamie Newman is a little bit better than Sam Hartman, but I think Sam Hartman with playing time, and if he gets the protection, is going to show to be pretty well. I like where the direction this team is going right now.
Ralph, what do you say, man?
Well, one thing I want to talk about, Rob mentioned injuries. Well, there were a lot more teams much more banged up than Wake Forest. We talked to coaches, and every coach is going to say they had injuries. But putting it in perspective from the number of players that started a game, number one in the entire NCAA was Clemson last year. They started 29 players. You got to start 22, 11 on offense, 11 on defense. So Clemson had their first 22 players, and only 7 other players made starts for Clemson. That shows you how healthy they were. Well, Wake Forest was number 4 in the country. They only started 34 players. Your original 22 and 12 more players. We're going to be talking about a team, NC State, to put it in perspective. Wake Forest started 34 players last year. NC State started 46 players, so they had to start an additional 12 players, just putting the injuries into perspective. I think Wake's in a bit of trouble here. They had 10.4 starters back last year, and this year they have 11. But the 11, they have 3 on offense and 8 on defense. And while I say 3 on offense, I will agree with Robbie. It's closer to 3.7. When I went back and looked at Sam Hartman, as you did, Rob, he started the first 9 games of 2018. In 4 of those games, the Wake Forest offense had 500 or more yards. So that shows you, as a young freshman coming in, the kid moved the team. So, I'm going to say almost 4 starters back on offense. But I look at their numbers, and, last year, they were, the turnovers, they were positive. They were +8 turnovers. That's going to be tough. And when you look at their points per game, they were 4-4 in conference play, but they were outscored in conference play. The crossover games, you always are looking at the crossover games when you're going through teams, and they're difficult. I have Wake Forest, Syracuse, and Boston College all as the bottom 3 teams in the ACC. All 3 are in this division, which, again, why Clemson is such a favorite. And then when I break down Wake Forest schedule, I have them as a dog of 6 or more in 6 games. I have them a favorite in 4 games, and then a toss-up against Appalachian State. So to me, Old Dominion's a win, Villanova's a win, Syracuse is a 4-point favorite, Boston College is a 5-point favorite. I have them at 5 wins tops. So I think they're going to be down, and I think that 4 straight bowls is that streak is going to be broken.
Demon Deacons fans not liking that, Ralph. Bringing it with the numbers for sure. His numbers against what the marketplace is saying right now. Always good stuff from Ralph Michaels. at Cal Sports LV on Twitter. Also, Rob Veno on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports. Guys, make sure to stay tuned to WagerTalk YouTube channel here. We got all kinds of stuff coming up. We got Meet the Experts. We got Korean baseball. We also got some horse racing picks all throughout the week, 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock Eastern time. So stay tuned for that. FSU, next team up here. We got Tommy with a comment in the chat box. 6-7 last year, just 4-9 against the spread. Couple things I took away preparing for the show here. FSU just 18-20 since the start of the 2017 season. Obviously, some coaching mishaps. It's just I know FSU fans aren't really happy with what's going on in Tallahassee, but Mike Norvell comes in, so hopefully a spark on offense. Robbie, what are you thinking this upcoming year for the FSU Seminoles, man? A lot of people think that they should be kind of up there with Clemson in the division, but it just hasn't been that way.
Yeah, and I think talent-wise, they're coming back a little bit. I mean, like you say, Drew, the coaching, it was a mess from the time Jimbo Fisher left, just because the conversion, especially on offense, was so drastic from what Jimbo Fisher did to what they ended up doing the last couple of years. The non-conference schedule, guys, I mean, they get 4 non-conference games, and you can't ask for 3 more difficult ones. Generally speaking, you go out and get yourself a couple of wins, but when you're going to play West Virginia, Boise State, and the Florida Gators, and that's basically, if Florida State doesn't get out early, it's going to be 3 losses because 2 of those 3 games are in the first 3 weeks. FSU gets beat by Boise last year at home. Now, this time they're going to have to travel to Idaho. I don't know that that's going to be a welcoming sight for Florida State. So when you're going through, and we went through these head coaching changes, Florida State was one of the teams we did. Mike Norvell in, as you mentioned, Drew. Kenny Dillingham, the young offensive coordinator, reunited with Mike Norvell, and Adam Fuller, the DC for Norvell at Memphis, comes across. But you're teaching all new systems. It's tough. The talent level has to be respected. The cohesiveness, I'm not sure that it gets there early enough. You almost wish, for Florida State's sake, that these games were played more towards the second half of the season or deeper into the second half of the season, but they're not. So they're going to be asked to do big things right away. And I just don't know, guys, that the quarterback position is good enough on this team to carry them. I think defense is probably the better unit. Last year, we talked about how they adjusted midstream defensively, put in a whole new scheme, and wound up playing better because they were not good to start the season. So for Florida State, Drew, it's a tough road. Never mind trying to get past Clemson. But when you have those non-conference games, what's their over-under season win total by chance, if either of you guys know it off the top of your head?
I'll look it up to get it right.
I mean, the potential for Florida State to be nothing more than a 7-5 team is there. For Florida State to be 9-3 if they come out very cohesive and ready to roll, that's there too. But I wouldn't place my money in that corner. I think this is a team that this coaching staff change is built for down the road success, meaning year 2 on, not necessarily this year. And where practices were concerned, guys, again, 2 spring practices with 2 full schematic changes. It's a little bit tough. The only advantage, as I mentioned earlier in our earlier show on Florida State, is that Mike Norvell has the benefit of recruits to his style, where Willie Taggart didn't have that benefit. Willie Taggart had Jimbo Fisher offensive leftovers. To have Willie Taggart's offensive leftovers spread type guys for Mike Norvell is a bit of an advantage, a head start.
And Robbie, I'm seeing 7.5, so 7 in the hook for the over/under wins.
It's a good number. I mean,
well, let me say this to you guys. Going through my power ratings, and again, people may have different power ratings. I only have Florida State as a dog of 3 or more in 2 games against Florida and Clemson. So let's throw those games out and count them as losses. That still gives them 10 games. They're a favorite in 6 of them, in 7 of them, and 3 are pickups. So I actually lean the other way. I think they're going to be I think they're playing at West Virginia and Atlanta. I have them as an 8.6 point favorite. They're going to be a 42-point favorite against Samford. And if ever you have to go to Boise and play someone, I'll tell you what, there's not a better scheduling situation than being a 42-point favorite against Samford and then having a bye week after that. So, it is the perfect spot. Now, Boise took care of them at home and they showed they were the better team. I do want to jump back, Robbie, because you talk about spring practices and it's so important. Well, when we talk about the ACC Atlantic, the rich kept getting richer. We didn't mention Clemson, but they had the most spring practices of anyone in the division with 9. Louisville had 7. Wake Forest and Boston College and NC State each had 5. And then Syracuse and Florida State each on the bottom had 2 or 3 practices. So, with Clemson, we didn't mention why the rich keep getting richer. Well, let's see. They had more practices. But as I said, with Florida State, I have them as basically pick'em games between the 3s against Boise, Louisville, and Miami. So, yes, I can see them with 7 wins. Yes, I can see them with 10 wins. When you have an elite program like Florida State, your window after a couple mediocre years is much longer than a team that's a 500 team. And the reason I say that is last year, Clemson had the number 10 recruiting class in the country. Florida State was number 18. So you are by far the second best recruiting class in the ACC. This year, Clemson was number 3, but Florida State number 22, 19 spots against the number 3 team. So you are still getting 5-star talent. You are still getting elite 4-star talent. Yes, you went 4-4 in the division last year, but of that 4-4, you were minus 30 yards per game. So that was much closer to a 3-5 or a 2-6 team. Why? Well, they were minus 3 turnovers as well, but they were plus couple turnovers in conference play. Florida State this year, number 27 as far as experience goes. 17 returning starters. That is top 15 in the country. 7 on offense, 10 on defense. And again, elite talent. While Louisville finished higher than them and Louisville was the better team at the end of last year, I actually have Florida State power rated at 78.4, 3 points ahead of Louisville. So I am buying into the Seminoles. Again, there's a lot to be put in those recruiting classes. They started 44 players. That was one of the most in the country because of experience. 27% of their players they started were sophomores last year. A lot of their young kids, and only 15% of their players. That's one of the lowest bottom 10 numbers in the country when only 15% of your starters from last year were seniors. The flip side, Virginia Tech started 59.5% of their starts were made by seniors. Again, Florida State only 15.0. So I look at this team on upside, 4-8 ATS last year, 4-3 in the conference with a push. I think I would be betting them over. Again, only a dog in 2 games. Those pick'em games are what's going to make their difference, but we could probably say that about every team in the conference. When you look at win totals, those pick'em games make the difference between being overs and unders.
In Ralph, it looks like from FSU's schedule, outside of the Samford game in the Clemson and I guess Florida games, like you said, a lot of these games seem like pick'ems to me. I mean, what when they're hosting Pittsburgh, that might be.
I have them as a 9-point favorite against Pittsburgh, a 9.2 against Syracuse, 17 against Boston College, and 16 against Wake. So I think because they were down, we perceive them as being in the same group. But when you start looking at the talent they have, again, I think that cream rises. And I have them as a double-digit favorite to 3 of those 4 teams.
And we got Tommy asking a question. Any thoughts on the FSU West Virginia game? If you can hit on that, Robbie, too.
Yeah, because, again, I think when I said the talent has to be respected, but I don't know about the cohesiveness, and there you go, especially on defense, guys, in 2 of those first 3 games against West Virginia with Neil Brown, who's a known offensive guy, against Boise State, Brian Harsin, a known offensive guy. When you have to go through new terminology and you've got some position switches on defense, you don't want, that one bust on coverage or whatever on defense in a pick'em style game or a coin toss game could cost you the game. And that's the situation Florida State's in from a learning position. I don't think the talent's to be questioned. Like I say, it's got to be respected. They've got a ton of talent. But against West Virginia week 1, Drew, I mean, it's the second year of Neil Brown's system, too. So it'll be an interesting matchup. Both teams, well, actually, Norvell's in his first, but Neil Brown's a year ahead of him. I just wonder how quickly Florida State will pick up all this new terminology, all these new assignments when they haven't had a chance to be on the field to learn to execute them. We'll see how much practice time they get. But that would be the other side of the coin to Florida State, where it could go 7-5, or like I said, maybe 9-3. We'll have to see which way that goes.
Great stuff so far, guys. We got Boston College, Syracuse, and NC State to wrap up the Atlantic Division of the ACC preview. You can catch the college football preview show each and every Tuesday, same time, same place, guys. So come back and join us 1 o'clock Eastern time on Tuesdays. We got Boston College, Ralph, 6-7 last year, 7-6 by my numbers, ATS. What are you thinking about the Eagles this upcoming year, man?
Well, let's see. Your quarterback, Anthony Brown's at Oregon. A.J. Dillon not playing. I have them as the lowest team in the ACC. They were the lowest recruited team in the country. They were number 63 in recruiting. Whoa. So it's just a tough run. They were -1 close loss. If you look at their offense last year, number 46 in the country average-wise. Their defense number 126. Well, that 46 on offense, again, you're missing Anthony Brown and A.J. Dillon. Last year, they only had 9 returning starters, so much wasn't expected of them. So getting to 4-4 with only 9 starters was a very nice coaching job. This year, though, they returned 14, 5 on offense, 9 on defense. So we'll see if Lukabu, their new DC, can get those 9 guys playing defense. You're not used to seeing, I mean, remember those Kuechly days and Boston College playing defense. So, when you see a defense that was allowing, they allowed 479 yards, they allowed 65% completions. They weren't getting many stops. Obviously, that's part of the reason that they were 6-2 in the conference over/under. But, I look at their schedule, and as I said, they're a team that I think I have them circled as perhaps one of the fakest teams in the country. Why? I have them as a 3-point favorite against Syracuse, a 6.6 favorite against Ohio, and then they may go on the road and get a road win against Kansas. So they may be 3-0, and people may say, well, I mean, this new coach, Jeff Hafley, look what he did at Ohio State. Look what he's done here at Boston College. Well, then if you look at their schedule, 5-point dog, 29-point dog, 6-point dog, 18-point dog, 7-point dog, 17, 37, and 5. The only game I left out of that was a 25-point home favorite against Holy Cross. So you're a dog of 5 or more in all but your Holy Cross game to finish. So to me, I'll wait to see what's happened the first 3 games. I hope they win. I hope they're 3-0 straight up in ATS against the spread. And then to me, fade.
Bobby, are you fade as well?
It's hard to disagree with anything Ralph said, Drew, especially since, again, you're going through. I mean, this is a major overhaul. I think Steve Adazio, basically, he's one of those, not quite to the extreme of Bob Davie at New Mexico, Drew, where he was just scrambling to try any schematic switch to keep his job. Steve Adazio was somewhat in that position, but the injury last year at quarterback forced him to just become a running team once again. Now, David Bailey stepped in for A.J. Dillon last year and ran very well, almost got to 1,000 yards. So running back might be the one position where they are okay. But everywhere else, when you're going through the type of overhauls that they are on both sides of the football, and I hope that Jeff Hafley has, the administration support for maybe 3 years, because it's going to take a while to me with this team to get all of this down. He's got some familiarity with Lukabu, the defensive coordinator. They've been on the same staff 3 times before, so at least they know what each other wants. The question is, you got to convey that to the players now. And BC did have 5 practices. To me, that's not enough. It's a better number than a lot of teams have, but it's just not enough to get a brand new playbook. You have to have that on-field time to learn the execution of it. Frank Cignetti Jr., again, this is a team that's run based for years, and now we're going to change it up to a more balanced playbook, more vertical passing. BC just doesn't have those players in place, guys. In order to be able to run this style offense, you need in college football not 2, but maybe 3 wide receiving threats. And most years, Boston College is lucky if they have 1. So it's going to take a couple of recruiting classes. Ralph mentioned they're 63rd in the nation, which, sits them at the bottom of the ACC. It's just not good right now. I'm not saying this guy can't build a competitive team. I don't know that they'll do it first season. I really don't.
We got Ryan in the chat box saying, not sure if they even beat Q's. And Syracuse, next team up, 5-7 last year, 4-8 against the number. Robbie, coming back at you. Dino Babers, started off with a bang at Syracuse, then a little bit of a drop-off here. Still an exciting kind of brand of football up there in the Dome. Can they kind of bring it back to when he first took over, in your opinion?
Well, here we go, guys. Because this wasn't a head coaching change, we didn't do this as part of our first set of shows, but there are 2 new coordinators here. And the offensive side of the football, I like quite a bit. Sterling Gilbert is the offensive coordinator, reunited with Dino Babers. They both come from the same place. They both come from the Art Briles tree. Dino Babers running this hurry-up spread offense, which is often referred to as a veer and shoot, not a run and shoot, but a veer and shoot. But basically, the head coach and the offensive coordinator are a match perfectly made. So I think that the offense could be a little bit better. Now, Eric Dungy set some records at quarterback for this team. He had a lot of injuries throughout his career, but he was certainly the top weapon at QB. Tommy DeVito, who's had a lot of playing time as a starter himself, more of a drop back passer in an RPO-style offense. He's not a runner, guys, but you don't have to be a runner. I mean, think back to Art Briles' offenses. RG3 had success as a dual threat. Bryce Petty had success as a stationary target. Nick Foles won a Super Bowl in an RPO-based offense as a stationary target. So the running aspect doesn't have to be there in this particular offense. DeVito is going to get to work here with a offensive coordinator who's known as a quarterback developer. So he's got a strong arm. He's got all the tools. We'll see if the passing game picks up. But Babers really was excited to get him and bring him back. Remember, Sterling Gilbert got run out of USF. They didn't like him down there. But this is probably a much better match. Power, running game, combined with like a 4 verticals and horizontal style passing game is what you'll see out of this offense. Defensively is where we see a little, this was interesting, guys, because Dino Babers went out. He fired his defensive coordinator from last year, right? Fires Brian Ward, gets Zach Arnett to come and teach the 3-3-5 at Syracuse. Zach Arnett shows up for a couple of weeks and then goes and takes the San Diego State job. And Babers, was pretty PO'd when he left. But he went to Arizona State. He took Tony White off Herm Edwards' staff, and Tony White had just been promoted from DB coach to defensive coordinator at Arizona State. He comes in, he's teaching the 3-3-5 here. It's a lot different than what, Syracuse has been playing. A lot of 4-man fronts, a lot of Tampa 2. So now you switch to the 3-3-5. This is an overhaul. I think that, when you talk about having positional changes that come with 3-man fronts and 4-man fronts, that's hard enough. For Syracuse, they only got 3 practice sessions in. To me, that's difficult. This defense wasn't good to begin with. I know the kids can stick their head in the playbook while we're during this lockdown time. But to me, it's not enough here. I think that the enthusiasm from what I read is there. They love the new system. Getting it on field, I'm not sure. I think this is going to probably bring us back to the very beginning of Dino Babers' tenure here at Syracuse, where every time I looked at a Syracuse game when he first got there, I wanted to play over. And I think that the offense is going to come back to those heights, and I may want to be playing overs a lot with Syracuse again. Season over under win total, not sure, but I think as it goes on, as it progresses, the 3-3-5, guys, it's still unique, but we've talked about a lot of head coaches all of a sudden going to 3-3-5. It's kind of a new wave. 1 week to prepare could cause some trouble for Syracuse opponents. Like I say, I'd rather play them totals wise during the season. And if I get good numbers on overs, I think that's where I'll head with this team.
Ralph, you think the Orange bounce back in 2020, man?
Well, the interesting thing about Syracuse is this. I mean, they play the weakest schedule of any Power 5 team. Their schedule is number 68 in the country. You look at Rutgers, Colgate, Western Michigan, and Liberty as non-conference. So you're a 5.7, a 31-point favorite, a 14-point favorite against Liberty, and I have them pick them against Western Michigan. So you have 4 potential wins. You also can be a favorite or a pick 'em against Boston College, Georgia Tech, and NC State. So, the teams that you're playing late in the year that I have you grouped in the bottom 3, you get to host NC State, you get to host Georgia Tech. So, I see them as a team where, I give them 5.5 wins, but those 5.5 wins are going to be higher than Wake Forest and higher than some other teams because of their scheduling spots. So again, they're a team that recruiting wise, struggling. 56 near the bottom of the ACC last year, 59. That's in the Boston College territory. Returning starters last year, they had the 3rd most returning starters of the 7 teams in the Atlantic. This year, they are last. So you have to look at what a team did last year. They were only 2-6, and they were 2-6 with +9 turnovers. That's a big difference, being +9 turnovers and only winning 2 games. So I don't think you're going to be plus those turnovers this year. There's normally a fallback. You're number 106 in terms of experience. You're second last in the division in recruiting. But again, you play the weakest schedule. So to me, there's going to be some play on spots for Syracuse. But as they progress, they have a schedule where they play their first 5 games, have a bye, and then play Liberty and then play Clemson. This is a team, to me, I say, I'm focusing on a home win against Liberty, and I'm not going to worry about Clemson. Yeah, they beat Clemson a couple years ago, but those days are gone of being a pipe dream. So, my initial thoughts as I go through each team will be potential to play on as a favorite against a weak defense, and fade as a dog in those situations where they're going to be a touchdown dog or more in 1, 2, in 4 of their games, and a 4-point dog against Wake.
Yeah, and we see it in their season win total, just 5.5 here. Syracuse right now at Caesars, little juice towards that over. So Syracuse, an interesting handicap, and Ryan in the chat box saying DeVito has a great arm, just doesn't know where it's going. So accuracy is somewhat important there at the quarterback position. Guys, we got 1 team left here in the ACC Atlantic Division. NC State 4-8 last year, 5-7 against the number. A couple stats here wanted to throw out before I throw it over to you, Ralph. 20 starters return off of last year's squad, so experience is at least there. But off of a 4-8 team, like we've talked about, Robbie, don't know how much that really matters if the starters are returning. 4-8 just last year, 6-game losing streak to end the season. And on this year's schedule, they got Clemson, UNC, and Louisville, 3 of the top teams in the ACC, all on the road. So kind of a tough schedule here for an ACC schedule. NC State at Caesars right now listed as a 4.5 for their season win total. Heavy juice towards the over. Robbie, NC State, last team up for the show. What are you thinking with the Wolfpack in 2020?
If they can take these 5, Drew, if they can get Troy, Delaware, Duke at home, Wake Forest at home, BC at home. They also play Liberty at home. I mean, to me, and they go on the road to play Syracuse. 4.5 out of all these teams we've talked about. Remember, 5 of these 7 teams in this division that we talked about today are going through some form of schematic change on one side of the football. And this team is not exempt from that. They're changing on the offensive side of the football. They've got a new coordinator on the defensive side, but there's no change there. To me, at 4.5, if I was to take any one of these scheme-changing teams and a lot of them are coin flip to go over their season total. I think with the schedule NC State has, the winnable games, I would probably try them. Tim Beck is your offensive coordinator here. Now, Tim Beck has spent the last 9 seasons running a power spread offense. It's what they're going to bring here. It's probably the best match for what he has on this team. If you go back in Tim Beck's history to 2014, you're going to find that his last 3 quarterbacks were Taylor Martinez at Nebraska, dual threat; JT Barrett at Ohio State, dual threat; Sam Ehlinger at Texas, dual threat. Here he gets Devin Leary, young, but a dual threat quarterback. So they're bringing in this power spread offense. Basically, NC State's best position group on offense is the running game. So I think that you'll probably see a run-oriented offense. The offense he's implementing here brings a lot of short passes. So in other words, we're going to see sprint outs with short throws, easy throws, the kind of throws that when you're watching a game, the analyst always says they should start the quarterback with some easy throws to get him into rhythm, right? That's going to be the case here with Devin Leary. It does take some vertical shots, but I think they're going to be careful with the football. They'll incorporate the quarterback run. So to me, the personnel that they have this year fits the scheme. I think that Tim Beck will be okay. The one complication here, guys, is that when you run this offense, there's 2 ways to block it: man blocking, zone blocking. Tim Beck chooses zone blocking, which is more complicated for the offensive linemen. So they have to learn that. But I think that's something that can be handled here. NC State has, I think, 10 returning starters on offense, a bulk of that offensive line. So I think they'll be okay. Defensively, Tony Gibson's going to take over. He's a 3-3-5 guy by nature. He ran that 3-3-5 at West Virginia for a lot of years. He was brought in last year at the head coach's request, Dave Doran, to change the offense. He was only co-defensive coordinator, but he basically had a huge say in implementing the 3-3-5. It didn't go well. The actual defensive coordinator and play caller was Dave Huxtable. Dave Huxtable struggled with it. His defense struggled with it. Fire him, elevate Gibson, and let him run it. That's what they're going to do now. I mean, in this system, his linebackers are the key to the whole defense. They're asked to do so much, so he's been made the linebackers coach as well. Game day play caller, linebacker coach, DC. Second year of the system, so the players are more familiar with it now. Gibson's also got a long history of coaching good defensive backs. Just go back to West Virginia in the Big 12. He had a couple of years where they played really, really good defense. I think took over the top, or maybe they were 1-2 with TCU. TCU is generally the best defensive team in that league. So I think the defense second year is going to be better. I would take my chances, guys, with this team and the winnable games that I mentioned. Not that they could win all 6, but we're talking about over 4.5. I think 5 is possible. You're going to have a team that's maybe more of an under type team, because there's going to be a lot of running the football, running and defense, running and defense, running and defense. We'll see if it succeeds, but I would take my chances with over 4.5.
Ralph, I'll tell you, it's tough start here. Louisville, then Mississippi State before Troy. I could see 0-2 out the gate, which makes it always tough to kind of bet the over. But I do agree with Robbie. I mean, there are some winnable games here, and it's a team that returns a lot of starters. So I do like the kind of the coaching roster here, Ralph. So I would look to be betting on NC State more so than Fadium. How do you feel?
Well, you know, I disagreed with Rob earlier, and let me finish it by saying I totally agree with Rob this time, because NC State over is my top totals play in this division. And you said something interesting, Drew. You said, oh my God, they have a brutal road schedule. I'll tell you what, if I'm a head coach, I absolutely want a brutal road schedule.
Yeah.
If you're playing Clemson, why not play them on the road? I'm not going to beat them at home. If you're going to play Louisville this year, why not play them on the road? I'm not going to beat them at home. If you're going to play North Carolina, I'm an 18-point dog. I'm not going to beat them, so play them on the road. Therefore, I have the winnable games at home. And if I'm playing well, turn the ball over, I win those games at home. So when I'm looking to play an over, I absolutely want tough road games. When we're talking about a team with 10 or 11 win total, that's a different story. But in this situation with NC State, You're talking about a team that is number 23 in the country in returning experience. You're talking about a team last year that, only returned 4 starters on offense. They were one of the least experienced teams. You're talking about a team last year in 8 games, they were minus 16 turnovers. That's incredible. You were minus 2 turnovers per game in the ACC. Well, that's why you sucked down the stretch. You're talking about a team that had 46 players make starts. Let me go back and remind you, Clemson had 29 players make starts. So everyone on your first unit and 7 other players. NC State had everyone on their first string, everyone on their second string, which is 44, and multiple third string players make starts. That's going to make you a much more experienced team. That's going to say a ton of your team, besides the 15 returning starters, have experience as well. And then you break down the schedule. Again, I have you as a 6-point favorite at Rutgers. Excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong team. I have them as a 0.9, as a 1-point home dog to Mississippi State, 5.5-point favorite to Troy, 29-point favorite to Delaware, 4-point favorite to Duke, 6.3 favorite to Wake Forest, 7.7 to Boston College, 17.7 to Liberty. So weak team Liberty at home, win. Weak team Boston College home, win. Weak team home Forest, win. Weak team Duke at home, win. Easy wins, add Troy, add Delaware. Toss-up games, Mississippi State and Syracuse. Again, I have them at 6.3, and that's on the most negative side, 6.3. My high side has them at 7.9, clearly like the over for this Wolfpack team.
All right, Ralph, going off market there. NC State to the over. I like it, Ralph. Follow him on Twitter at CalSportsLV. He's a great follow, as is Robbie Veno at Rob Veno Sports. Rob, anything you want to say in closing?
No, that's good stuff, guys. That's the way we'll continue to break down these schedules. And like I did today, Drew, anything that we missed because they weren't full head coaching changes as far as scheme changes are concerned, we'll hit on them as well as we did today with a bunch of these teams. It does make a difference in the way you perceive them heading into the season, especially as we've mentioned ad nauseum with the spring shutdowns of practices. But to Ralph's point, a lot of these teams, the rich got richer. They had some spring practices. It's interesting, guys. I think that's due to television. Like the SEC sets their spring schedule back because those spring games are televised in an open time of the year where ESPN doesn't have much going on. They throw spring games on. These coaches that got their spring practices in might look like geniuses because they started early. But I just think that teams that didn't is because all those games end up televised live, the spring games, and just a bad break for those teams not to be able to get stuff in. This division, Clemson's to win. I think Ralph and I are both in agreement. NC State over 4.5 wins would be a top season over-under win play.
All right, Ralph, anything in conclusion before we shut this down?
Nope. It's the funny thing is, though, it's not how you're looking at teams in different ways. I'm excited about an NC State win team that I almost have as the same, power rating as Wake Forest. But again, it's not just how good a team is. It's the coaching, it's the practices, it's when you play the teams, it's where you play the teams, it's how the schedule plays out. So again, I think it was a good deep dive showing that there's some teams I like more than the others, but there's some teams that even though I don't like that team as much, you may bet them on an over on the season win total where another team is the under. But NC State just jumps out to me because I'm a big turnover guy. I'm a big number of players started. And even more so as returning starters. I think returning starters is a bit overrated, but returning experience is the key. And NC State has the talent to put them up in the middle of the pack.
All right, great stuff, Rob. Great stuff, Ralph. We got David, Henry, Chris, Ryan, all you guys. Think of Fink, Tommy, all. Thank you for chiming in the chat box. Great stuff as always. So, guys, each and every Tuesday, 1 o'clock Eastern time. This is the college football preview show. We will be breaking down the ACC Coastal next Tuesday with my sleeper team in the ACC. So join us next Tuesday for Ralph.
The best pair of defensive ends in the country.
Everybody raise your pens. All pens up.
Let's do it, guys. All right, guys.
I like that.
Be safe till next time. Remember to wash your hands. Best of luck with your bets, guys.